perfect timing here, actually. John McDonnell is just arriving. I know John has to leave quickly because he has an amendment to move. So if it's all right with you, I'll take John's contribution now. But just in doing that, can I ask, because we're going to take time for questions, members of the panel just to bear that in mind in making the contributions, because we do have to be out of here by 3 o'clock. Anyone that can, if you can assemble where you came in, there's going to be photos taken for your journal, for the National Journal as well. So just to bear that in mind, but we do need to finish at 3 o'clock. I'll be bearing that in mind when people are making the contributions. John McDonnell, the chair of our parliamentary group.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be extremely brief. We've got the Fiscal Responsibility Bill up in Parliament at the moment, which is basically introducing a piece of legislation which will ensure that the government is legally committed to cutting the budget deficit by 50% in 4 years. What that means from yesterday's interview in the Financial Times by the Chancellor of the Exchequer is that apart from health, basically apart from schools, police and education, every other department will be cut by anything up to 17%. It's inspiring, really, isn't it? Absolutely inspiring. And you can see where the sort of herd mentality has come from, because that's almost a consensus across political parties about cutting the deficit. And it's about, basically, it's about ordinary people, ordinary working people paying for this economic crisis that's been brought about by the greed of the finance sector that combines sort of government. Anyway, that's my world position for the day. And I put it in that context. Let me tell you where we're at in terms of our discussions and where we're going. As a result of the work that you've done on the ground, in terms of briefing your local MPs, lobbying them, talking to them about the consequences of the government's plans for land registry, what that resulted in is a large number of MPs now supporting us in terms of getting the government to try and think again. Since we've been lobbying, we've had a series of meetings with the Minister, Michael Wills, and to be frank, we've been trying to use those meetings to negotiate as best we possibly can to get the government to have a rethink, just to stand back and look at this rationally. That's all we're asking them to do, because you know better than I, but what we've been trying to say in all our briefings, that some of this stuff that's coming forward is lunatic, absolute lunatic. To be cutting jobs and to be closing offices and to be undermining the land registry service at this point in time, or basically when we're hoping we're trying to plan our way out of an economic recession, when we're hoping the housing market will lift, when there's so much work to be done in terms of registration of land to enable the long-term planning of our communities and our country, it is lunatic to be cutting jobs, certainly on this scale, and to be doing this reorganisation and parceling up the service itself. Now, we feel that in the discussions we've had with ministers, at least we're raising levels of consciousness and awareness about the madness of these proposals. It's a bit difficult when you have senior staff resigning and going off and retiring on a daily basis. That really does inspire confidence, doesn't it? But what's interesting is those people who have managed the service, i.e. past chief executives and all the rest of it, in their comments and the alternatives they're putting forward, are aiding us in demonstrating that the government's proposals are going to drive this service into the sand. And it's one of those things that you may not initially think you're going to lose you're going to somehow in the short term think this is a great loss, but in 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years' time, people will wake up and think, why did we do that? What a loss of a service that the country so essentially needs. So where we've got to, I think we've done Michael Wills 4 meetings. 4 meetings. I've met him more often than my own family. But I think my wife is going to name him as co-respondent. The good thing, to give him his due, he's been willing to meet us, and we've been able to have open discussions with him. How much that has influenced the agenda, I'm not sure. So, the purpose of today now is to, I think, make sure that after this meeting, when we're meeting the individual MPs now, we get across the basic arguments now. First of all, that the pace of these changes that are being brought forward and it's resulting in irrationality in the decision-making process. That the proposals that are put forward so far actually in the long term will undermine this service that is so essential to the country. So the next issue then is we're asking MPs then to join us, and many have, there's MPs from cross parties here, all different political parties, to join with us now through the PCS parliamentary group to get government to pull back and look at the alternative options that we're putting forward. And the union is now submitting its alternative proposal as part of the consultation process, and we did an independent report a few months ago, as you know. If we can get from today that commitment from MPs to go back to ministers and say, hold fire, and let's have a proper negotiation, and at the same time explore other options, I think we've got a chance of getting some form of sense out of them. So that's the job today. Finally, let me just say this. In all the lobbying that we do, of course we're trying to be as reasonable as possible. We're trying to say to them, if we can get into a rational debate, we think we can convince you. But the problem is this, if there's a bloody-minded agenda from the Treasury or elsewhere, that you're going to cut this service no matter what, and we don't care what proposal you come up with as long as you reach a bottom line level of cuts. Well, our only response to that is to stand firm. And when I mean standing firm, it is fighting force with force. And you know the only strength that you have is through your union, and if necessary, through the strength of being willing to take industrial action if necessary. And that's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to confront, but it's the only way, if reason will not work, the only way to bring them back to the table is industrial action. And that's why, as a union, we're trying to ensure that we exhaust every avenue possible, first of all, but also we say to them very clearly, we are serious about this, and we're not going to stand by and let our people lose their jobs, close their offices, and to be frank with you, undermine our local economies as a result of that. Solidarity.
John, just as you're leaving there, as always, that was absolutely excellent. I think just underlying how important the political campaigning is, and about how, as a union, we are trying every way to get those results. So the industrial campaign becomes a key part of the strategy as well. And I know, obviously, you see that as very important as well, which is why you're here today.